You're just a janitor, Adam. Leave corporate matters to those who really understand these things. Richard Blackstone's words echoed through the glass-walled boardroom of Pinnacle Industries, followed by muffled laughter from the executives around the mahogany table. I stood there, holding my cleaning cart with one hand and a manila envelope with the other. Inside that envelope was the discovery that could save the company from an $80 million financial catastrophe. But to Richard, I was invisible. Just another blue uniform passing unnoticed through the corporate hallways. My name is Adam Torres, and at 32 years old, I have been working as a cleaning supervisor at Pinnacle Industries for 8 years. What these people in their $3,000 suits didn't know was that I had 2 college degrees sitting at home, one in accounting and one in management. The financial crisis of 2008 destroyed my career when my former company went bankrupt, forcing me to take any job available to feed my family. But there was an advantage to being invisible. For 8 years, I cleaned offices after hours, organized documents left on desks, and inevitably absorbed information that no one imagined a mere janitor could understand. And 3 days earlier, while emptying the CFO's trash, I saw the preliminary audit reports. Numbers that didn't add up. Discrepancies that screamed fraud. Mr. Blackstone, I insisted, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. If you could just take a look at these documents, there's evidence that someone is embezzling funds from the acquisitions account. The numbers show unauthorized transfers totaling. Enough! Richard slammed his hand on the table, his icy blue eyes fixed on me. Security! Escort this man out. And you, he pointed directly at me, you're fired. Get your things and get out of my building. Now. The murmurs around the room grew louder. Some executives avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Others seemed amused by the spectacle. But I saw something else in Richard's eyes at that moment. It wasn't just arrogance. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes when someone touches too closely on the truth you're desperately trying to hide. As the security guards approached, I nodded calmly and put the envelope back in my cart. Understood, sir. I'll gather my things. I left that room with the same dignity with which I had entered, but my mind was already racing. Richard Blackstone had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because what he didn't know was that I hadn't just discovered inconsistent numbers. I had uncovered an entire scheme, complete with names, dates, and bank accounts. More importantly, I had copies of everything safely stored at home. If you're enjoying this story of how a simple janitor prepares to take down a corrupt CEO, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how far this revenge will go. As I walked down the hallway toward the elevator, with curious glances following me, a single question hammered in my mind. Did Richard really believe he had silenced the problem by firing me? Because if he did, he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating the people he considers invisible. Richard Blackstone wasn't just an arrogant CEO. He was a corporate predator who had turned Pinnacle Industries into his personal playground. At 51, with his perfectly coiffed gray hair and tailor-made Italian suits, he epitomized everything people despised about the American corporate world. During my 8 years watching from the sidelines, I saw how he operated. Richard didn't build his fortune through innovation or visionary leadership. He was a master of financial manipulation, using the company as his personal bank account while maintaining a flawless facade for investors and employees. The scheme I uncovered was more sophisticated than I had initially imagined. Through documents I collected during months of night work, I mapped out a complex system of fraudulent transfers. Richard had created a network of shell companies, all registered in tax havens, that received payments for consulting services that were never rendered. Over the past 3 years, he had embezzled more than $12 million from the company's acquisition funds. The money was transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands through an intricate web of transactions that appeared legitimate on the surface but revealed their true nature when viewed together. The most revolting part was how he justified his crimes. In audio recordings I found in his office trash, phone conversations he deleted but forgot to empty the digital trash can, I heard Richard bragging to a friend about how he was too smart to get caught, and how employees were cattle at work while the smart ones profit. When I got home that night, after being escorted out like a criminal, my wife Maria was waiting for me in the kitchen. Her eyes filled with tears when I told her what had happened. "Adam, how are we going to pay the mortgage? What about Sophia's medical treatment?" she asked, referring to the rising costs of occupational therapy for our 7-year-old daughter, who was born with cerebral palsy. That was the first time the reality of the situation hit me fully. It wasn't just about my wounded pride or abstract justice. Richard had just taken away the livelihood of a family that depended on every penny of my salary. He had condemned a disabled child to potentially lose the treatment she needed. That night, while Maria slept restlessly beside me, I lay awake mentally organizing everything I knew. The evidence I had wasn't just numbers on spreadsheets. It was specific transactions I could trace back to actual bank accounts. I had names of complicit executives, including CFO Jonathan Hayes, who signed off on approvals knowing exactly where the money was going. More importantly, I had something Richard didn't know about: intimate knowledge of all the company's internal systems. During 8 years of cleaning offices, I had memorized passwords left on post-it notes, observed security procedures, and even photographed important documents when I found evidence of irregularities. Richard believed that firing me had eliminated the threat. In fact, it had only freed me from the constraints of being a company employee. Now I could act without worrying about corporate protocols or hierarchies. On the second day after my dismissal, I discovered that Richard had spread a distorted version of events to other executives. According to him, I was an unstable employee who had broken into confidential files and made baseless accusations because I was emotionally disturbed by changes at the company. This false narrative wasn't just a lie, it was a calculated strategy to destroy my credibility before I could reveal the truth. Richard was using his power and influence to portray me as a crazy conspiracy theorist, ensuring that any evidence I presented would be discredited from the outset. It was at that moment that I fully understood who I was dealing with. Richard wasn't just a thief. He was a sociopath who would destroy anyone who threatened his empire, regardless of the consequences for innocent families. While he slept peacefully in his $3 million mansion, built with money stolen from his own employees, my family faced the possibility of losing our home. While he planned his next vacation on a private yacht, Sophia might have to stop the treatment that was helping her develop basic motor skills. But Richard had made one fundamental mistake in underestimating me. He saw a janitor's uniform and assumed he had eliminated a minor problem. What he didn't realize was that he had declared war on someone who knew every dirty secret of his fraudulent operation. Lying in the darkness of my bedroom that third night, I made a decision that would change everything. It wouldn't just be about getting my job back or clearing my name. It would be about ensuring that Richard Blackstone faced real consequences for every dollar he stole and every life he damaged. Starting the next day, I would begin implementing a plan that would turn his arrogance into his greatest vulnerability. Because while Richard quietly celebrated what he believed to be his victory, I was already meticulously building the framework for his downfall. Richard's campaign to destroy my reputation didn't stop with whispered lies in corporate hallways. In the second week after my dismissal, I discovered the true extent of his revenge when Maria came home in tears after a meeting at Sophia's school. "They said they can't offer the scholarship anymore," she whispered, taking off her coat with trembling hands. The coordinator, Mrs. Williams, was very polite, but she mentioned that they had received concerning information about our family situation. "About your mental stability and problems with the law." I felt the blood drain from my veins. The private school Sophia attended was linked to an educational foundation of which Richard was a board member. He hadn't just fired me, he was systematically destroying every aspect of our family life. "Daddy, why is Mommy crying?" Sophia asked from the living room, her small voice echoing through the silent house. My daughter, with her 7 years and smile that lit up any room, couldn't understand why our world was falling apart. That night, after I put Sophia to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a pile of unpaid bills spread out in front of me. The mortgage was late. The health insurance would be cancelled in 15 days. And now, the special education Sophia needed was being used as a weapon against our family. That's when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I immediately recognized the voice on the other end of the line. "Adam? This is Michael Santos from Pinnacle's Internal Audit Department. Do you remember me?" Michael and I had worked together on a few projects during my first few years at the company. He was one of the few executives who always treated me with respect, recognizing my accounting experience despite my official position. "Sure, Michael. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I need to meet with you in person. There are some things going on here that, well, I think you should know about. Things that may be of interest not only to you, but also to the FBI." 2 hours later, we met at a discreet cafe across town. Michael seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder before speaking. Adam, what Richard did to you was just the beginning. After you left, he promoted Jonathan Hayes to Vice President of Finance and gave him carte blanche over all transactions. The transfers you discovered? They've tripled in the last 2 weeks. He slid a thin folder across the table. I got copies of some reports before they were lost from the files. Richard is rushing the scheme because he knows the annual external audit is coming. He plans to transfer everything to offshore accounts and then claim he was hacked or something. I opened the folder and felt my breath catch. The numbers were even worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just $12 million. It was $23 million embezzled over the last 5 years, with most of it concentrated in the last 6 months. Michael, why are you showing me this? You could take this straight to the authorities. He sighed deeply. Because Richard called me into his office yesterday and said that if I asked inconvenient questions, I'd end up like you. Fired, defamed, and with no references. My daughter is starting college next year, Adam. I can't risk it. But you can help me do the right thing, I concluded, finally understanding. Exactly. You have nothing left to lose with Richard. And you have the experience to understand these transactions better than any outside auditor. Besides, he leaned forward, lowering his voice, there's something else. Richard doesn't know I know, but he's planning to pin the fraud on you. I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. What do you mean? He's building a narrative that you uncovered the scheme because you were involved. A disgruntled employee who tried to blackmail the company and was fired when he refused to cooperate. He's already planted some fake documents in the old files with your forged signature. The coffee around me seemed to grow darker. Richard wasn't just stealing millions. He was setting up the perfect scapegoat. A former employee with access to the systems, fired for misconduct, with no resources to defend himself properly. How much time do we have? I asked, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. The external audit begins in 6 weeks. If he manages to transfer the rest of the money and implement his version of the story by then, you'll be arrested and he'll walk away as the heroic CEO who uncovered the fraud of a corrupt employee. That night, I returned home with a crystal-clear clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Maria was asleep, but Sophia had left a drawing on the kitchen table, our family of 3 in front of our house, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. I picked up the drawing and sat down at the desk in the living room, where I used to pay bills and help Sophia with her homework. For the first time since my dismissal, I felt no despair or blind rage. I felt determination. Richard Blackstone had made the classic mistake of every sociopath. He had completely underestimated his victim. He saw a humiliated janitor and assumed I would hide in a corner until he was done destroying my life. What he didn't know was that during 8 years of watching from the hallways of Pinnacle Industries, I hadn't just learned about his crimes. I had mapped out the entire corporate ecosystem of the company. I knew every executive, every process, every weak point in the system he used to protect himself. More importantly, Richard had just given me something I didn't have before, an inside ally with privileged access and a personal motivation to see him fall. I opened my laptop for the first time in 2 weeks and started typing. Not an emotional or desperate plan for revenge, but a detailed strategic map that would turn every move Richard made against me into additional evidence against him. For 8 years, I had been the invisible man who cleaned the offices while the executives planned in private meetings. Now, that invisibility would become my greatest advantage. Because it's very difficult to defend yourself against an enemy you don't consider a real threat. Richard wanted to use me as a scapegoat? Perfect. That meant he would have to publicly explain every detail of the scheme I uncovered. He wanted to destroy my family to silence me? That mistake had just given me the motivation I needed to not only defend myself, but to ensure he could never hurt anyone else again. As I typed the first drafts of what would become a 400-page dossier, a single question hammered at my mind. Did Richard really believe that a man desperate to protect his family would be easier to defeat than a complacent employee? Because if he did, he was about to find out that he had just awakened the very kind of enemy his arrogance had blinded him to, someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by fighting to the end. The first phase of my plan began the following Monday at 5:30 a.m. in the parking lot of a Starbucks 20 minutes from Pinnacle Industries. Michael arrived on time, carrying a discreet backpack and with red eyes from spending the weekend compiling evidence. I got access to the accounting backup servers, he whispered, handing me a flash drive. Richard doesn't know there's an automatic copy of all transactions from the last 7 years. including the ones he tried to delete. I plugged the device into my laptop and felt my heart race. These weren't just numbers on spreadsheets, they were digital signatures, timestamps, metadata that proved not only the theft, but also the deliberate attempt to cover up the evidence. Michael, this is pure gold. But we need more than financial evidence. We need context, the whole picture. Over the next 2 weeks, we developed a communication system that would have impressed any intelligence agent. Michael installed small recording devices in meeting rooms during his routine inspections. I analyzed the transcripts at home, mapping not only the financial crimes, but the entire network of complicity. We discovered that Jonathan Hayes, the new vice president of finance, wasn't just an accomplice, he was the architect of a second layer of fraud. He had created phantom contracts with non-existent suppliers, inflating operating costs to justify the suspicious transfers. But the most devastating discovery came in the 3rd week. Richard wasn't just stealing from Pinnacle Industries. He had used the company as collateral for massive personal loans, compromising the financial future of all 2,300 employees. Adam, look at this, Michael said during our weekly meeting, pointing to a series of documents. He's mortgaged the company's intellectual property rights. If those debts are called in, Pinnacle may have to sell its core patents to cover the loans. The magnitude of the betrayal took my breath away. Richard wasn't just enriching himself at the expense of the employees, he was potentially destroying the entire company to finance his extravagant lifestyle. That night, while helping Sophia with her physical therapy at home, I made a decision that would change everything. It wouldn't be enough to just expose Richard. I needed to protect the company and its employees in a way that would ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. Daddy, why are you always working on the computer now? Sophia asked, her little voice curious as she practiced her motor coordination exercises. I'm solving a very important problem, Princess. A problem that will help many families like ours. Maria joined us in the living room, sitting down next to me on the sofa. Adam, I can see this is consuming you. Are you sure this is the right thing to do? I showed her a photograph Michael had obtained from the latest quarterly report. See this number here? Richard stole enough to pay for Sophia's treatment for the next 20 years. And enough to guarantee a decent retirement for all the cleaning staff who have worked for the company for decades. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Then let's end this once and for all. Meanwhile, Richard was getting bolder and bolder. Michael told me that he had bragged at an executive meeting about how he had cleaned house by getting rid of troublemakers like me. Even worse, he started spreading rumors that I had tried to blackmail the company before I was fired. He's planting seeds to justify his version of the story, Michael explained. Just yesterday, I heard him tell the board that he'd discovered irregularities in the old files and was investigating possible sabotage by disgruntled former employees. If you've been following this journey of how an underestimated man prepares to take down an empire built on lies, subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will show that even the most powerful tyrants have fatal blind spots. The 4th week brought the first real obstacle. Michael called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice tense and whispering. Adam, Richard has hired a private security firm to investigate internal leaks. They're auditing all access to the systems, including mine. I felt a chill down my spine. If they discovered our operation before we were ready, Richard would have time to cover his tracks and fully implement his narrative about me. How much time do we have? I asked. A week, maybe 2 at most. That's when I implemented the riskiest part of the plan. During my 8 years as a cleaning supervisor, I had memorized the building's emergency access codes, codes that allowed entry during fire alarms or other critical situations. Codes Richard never imagined I had. The following Thursday, at 2 in the morning, I entered the Pinnacle Industries building for the last time. Not as an employee, but as someone on a mission of justice. Michael had left a copy of the executive file keys at the agreed location. I spent 3 hours photographing original documents, copying physical files that didn't exist in digital form, and most importantly, installing a small backup device on the main servers, something that would ensure that any future attempt to delete evidence would be automatically preserved. When I left the building at 5 in the morning, I carried with me not only enough evidence to destroy Richard, but also a complete plan to restructure the corporate governance of Pinnacle Industries. The following Friday, Richard made the mistake I had been waiting for. During a meeting with potential investors, he presented financial projections that depended directly on the money he had stolen. Michael recorded everything. He basically confessed to the crime to a room full of witnesses, Michael told me later. Only they didn't know they were listening to a confession. That night, I reviewed every element of the dossier I had compiled, 417 pages of documentary evidence, 53 hours of audio recordings, photographs of original documents, and testimony from 6 employees who had witnessed wrongdoing but were afraid to speak up. Most importantly, I had something Richard never imagined, a complete list of all the company's investors, clients, and business partners. People who had a right to know that their investments were being stolen by a sociopath in a designer suit. The final moment of preparation came on Sunday night. Maria and Sophia were asleep when I finished printing and organizing 300 physical copies of the complete dossier. Each copy would be sent simultaneously to media outlets, regulatory agencies, law firms specializing in corporate fraud, and directly to the desk of every member of the board of directors. As I sealed the last envelope, I realized I no longer felt anger or despair. I felt something much more powerful, the absolute certainty that Richard Blackstone had completely underestimated the kind of enemy he had created. For 8 years, I had watched from the sidelines as men like him destroyed lives with impunity. Now, for the first time, one of them would face complete and transparent justice for the crimes he had committed. On Monday morning, Richard would wake up as the CEO of an $80 million company. On Tuesday night, he would discover that his entire life had been built on lies that had finally been exposed to the light of day. But I wasn't yet sure he would understand the real lesson he was about to learn, that in a just society, no matter how powerful you are, there is always someone watching, documenting, and waiting for the right moment to ensure that truth prevails over corruption. The execution began at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning, exactly as planned. While Richard was enjoying his morning coffee in his mansion, believing he had complete control over the narrative surrounding my resignation for misconduct, 300 copies of my dossier were being delivered simultaneously to offices across the city. The first sign that something had changed came at 8:15. Michael called me, his voice tense but with a hint of satisfaction. "Adam, you need to see this. Richard just got a call from the law firm Morrison & Associates. They represent 3 of Pinnacle's largest investors. He's pale as a ghost." 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Jennifer Walsh, an investigative reporter for Channel 12, who had received one of the copies. "Mr. Torres, I've reviewed the documents we received this morning. Are these numbers real? We have evidence of $23 million in fraudulent transfers spread over 5 years. Every number has been verified 3 times, Ms. Walsh. I have audio recordings confirming the transactions, as well as original signed documents. Can we meet today? This story is going to air tonight." At 9:30, the first earthquake hit Richard directly. The Securities and Exchange Commission called requesting an emergency meeting for that afternoon. 15 minutes later, it was the FBI's turn. Michael managed to record Richard's phone conversation with his personal lawyer, Harold Mackenzie. The CEO's normally controlled and authoritative voice came out in a high-pitched tone of barely concealed panic. "Harold, someone has leaked confidential information about internal company operations. We need an injunction to prevent the publication of illegally obtained documents." "Richard, I've had 5 calls this morning from different agencies. They're not interested in injunctions. They're interested in explanations. What kind of internal operations are we discussing?" The silence that followed lasted almost a full minute. At 10:45, Richard called an emergency meeting with the entire executive board. Michael was present and relayed every word to me in real time via coded messages. "Gentlemen, it appears we have a situation. A disgruntled former employee is spreading misinformation about our company to damage our reputation ahead of the audit." The Director of Operations, William Chun, interrupted, "Richard, we've received a call from the Federal Prosecutor's Office. They want access to our financial records for the last 5 years. This doesn't sound like a disgruntled employee. And our insurance company canceled our executive liability policy an hour ago," added the Chief Legal Officer, Sarah Martinez. "They said it was based on information received about possible systematic corporate misconduct." It was at that moment that Richard finally understood the magnitude of what he was facing. This wasn't just a public relations problem that could be hushed up with expensive lawyers and carefully crafted statements. It was a full-blown coordinated investigation by multiple authorities, all operating with detailed, verified evidence. At 11:30, He made his first panic mistake. Richard called me directly on my cell phone. "Adam, we need to talk." His voice was forcedly calm, but I could detect the underlying desperation. "There's been a misunderstanding about your dismissal. Maybe we can work this out amicably." "There is no misunderstanding, Richard. You called me just a janitor, and said I should stick to cleaning toilets. Then you spread lies about my mental stability and tried to frame me for crimes you committed. Look, Adam, I know you're upset, but let's be practical. You have a family to support. I can offer you generous severance if you publicly clarify that there were mistakes in your allegations." He chuckled softly. "What kind of severance?" $50,000. Cash. Today. "Richard, you stole $23 million. $50,000 is what you spent on corporate lunches in 2 months. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before he spoke again, his voice visibly altered. "What do you want, Adam? Be reasonable. I want you to publicly confess every penny you stole. I want you to return all the money. And I want you to personally apologize to every employee you hurt with your fraud." "That's impossible. You don't understand the complexities of corporate business." "Actually, Richard, I understand perfectly well. I have 2 college degrees that you never bothered to check when you hired me as a janitor 8 years ago. I understand exactly how you structured your shell companies in the Cayman Islands, how you forged consulting documents, and how you used the acquisitions account as your personal bank account." For the first time in the conversation, Richard was completely silent. "Oh, and Richard? I have recordings of your phone conversations where you brag about being too smart to get caught, and call employees cattle. I have photographs of the original documents signed by you authorizing fraudulent transfers. And I have witnesses who heard your inadvertent confessions to investors." "That's impossible," he muttered, but his voice no longer carried any conviction. "It's possible when you spend 8 years being invisible in the corridors of your own company, Richard. You never noticed that I wasn't just an ordinary cleaner. You never noticed that I organized documents in chronological order, that I made notes about discrepancies, that I photographed evidence whenever I found irregularities." By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Richard's situation had completely deteriorated. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. 3 major investors demanded immediate explanations. The FBI asked him not to leave town. And the evening news announced a federal investigation into massive corporate fraud at a local company. That's when he made his second panic mistake. He tried to run away. Michael called me at 3:15, his voice urgent. "Adam, Richard just ran out of the building. Literally ran. He grabbed his personal car and sped out of the parking lot. I think he's trying to get to the airport." I smiled calmly as I walked down the sidewalk toward my own car. "Michael, do you remember I mentioned installing backup devices on the servers last week?" "Yes, to preserve evidence in case he tried to delete files." "Well, I also installed a small GPS tracker in his car. More importantly, I used my contacts in the aviation industry to put his name on the airport security watch list." 45 minutes later, Richard discovered that not only had his ticket to the Bahamas been cancelled, but that federal agents were waiting for him at the international departure terminal. The final call came at 5 in the afternoon. Richard, now in custody for questioning, was allowed to make one phone call. He chose to call me. "Adam," his voice was broken, defeated. "How did you do this? How did you coordinate all this?" "Richard, for 8 years you treated me like I was a piece of office furniture. Invisible, interchangeable, without intellectual value. But being invisible gave me access to every corner of your operation. Being underestimated allowed me to document every crime without raising suspicion. And being fired freed me to act without corporate limitations. But the connections, the contacts with authorities, the coordination. Oh, that. You forgot to check my background before the crisis of 2008. I worked in forensic auditing for one of the largest accounting firms in the country. I have friends in every regulatory agency, in several law firms specializing in corporate fraud, and in 3 different newspaper newsrooms." I could hear her heavy breathing on the other end of the line. "The difference between us, Richard, is that you used your connections to cover up crimes. I used mine to expose the truth. What happens now? Now you face the consequences of every choice you've made in the last 5 years. The FBI has enough evidence to prosecute you for bank fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The Internal Revenue Service is auditing your personal accounts. And the Securities and Exchange Commission is revoking your license to operate any public company. A long silence followed. You know what else, Richard? Tomorrow morning, all 2,300 employees of Pinnacle will receive a letter explaining exactly how you stole their money. And explaining how the new corporate governance structure, which will be implemented under federal supervision, will ensure that this never happens again. You've destroyed my life, he muttered. No, Richard. You destroyed your own life. I merely documented the process and ensured there were consequences. When I hung up the phone, for the first time in weeks, I felt a deep calm settle in my chest. It wasn't vengeful satisfaction or glee at the downfall of an enemy. It was something much more powerful, the quiet certainty that justice, when executed with patience, precision, and irrefutable evidence, is one of the few real antidotes to systemic corruption. Richard Blackstone had spent 5 years believing that corporate power made him untouchable. That afternoon, he discovered that no position is high enough to escape the consequences when someone with knowledge, determination, and access to the truth decides that the time has come for accountability. But the story was not over yet. Because while Richard faced federal interrogation, I was preparing for the final phase of the plan, to ensure that his downfall would turn into real and lasting reconstruction for all those he had harmed. Richard Blackstone's conviction made history in federal court. 16 months after his arrest at the airport, he was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for bank fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. More importantly, he was ordered to pay back every penny of the $23 million he stole, plus fines totaling an additional $41 million. I sat in the front row of the courtroom on sentencing day, watching as the man who had called me just a janitor was handcuffed and led away in an orange prison uniform. His perfectly coiffed gray hair had given way to a scruffy bald head. The $3,000 Italian suit was replaced by the rough standard-issue prison garb. When our eyes met for the last time, I no longer saw the arrogance that had defined his personality. I saw something I never imagined I would see on Richard Blackstone's face: complete acceptance of defeat. Mr. Torres, Judge Wilson called me after the sentence. Would you like to make a statement? I stood up, adjusting the new suit I had bought specifically for this moment. Your Honor, for 8 years I worked in the halls of Pinnacle Industries watching men in expensive suits make decisions that affected thousands of working families. I learned that true power isn't in the position you hold, but in the responsibility you accept. I looked directly at Richard. This man chose to use his power to steal the future from people who trusted him. Today, justice has proven that no matter how high you climb the corporate ladder, there are still consequences for your actions. 3 months later, I was officially named Director of Corporate Integrity at Pinnacle Industries. The board of directors offered me a salary of $150,000 a year, more than 4 times what I earned as a cleaning supervisor. But the real transformation wasn't in my paycheck. I implemented an anonymous reporting system that allowed any employee to report irregularities directly to the board. I created monthly audits where I personally reviewed all transactions over $10,000. Michael Santos was promoted to Chief Financial Officer. Together, we rebuilt the entire finance department with procedures that made it impossible for Richard's crimes to be repeated. Adam, Michael told me during a meeting 6 months after my promotion, you didn't just expose the fraud. You transformed the entire corporate culture of this company. The company's productivity increased by 36% in the first year. Employee turnover dropped to virtually zero. People wanted to work for a company where they felt valued and listened to. Sophia, my daughter, not only resumed her treatment, but was accepted into a special program for gifted children. The school that had canceled her scholarship because of Richard's lies now offered her a full scholarship. Dad, she said to me one morning, my teacher said you're famous for being very brave. Is that true? I knelt down beside her, looking into her bright eyes. Sophia, I wasn't brave. I just decided that some things are too important to accept in silence. When someone hurts the people you love, you find strength you didn't know you had. A year and a half later, I received an unexpected call from Richard's lawyer. My client would like to speak with you. He wants to apologize. 3 days later, I heard Richard's voice from prison, low, hoarse, stripped of all the authority that had once characterized it. Adam, I called because recognizing the harm we caused is part of recovery. You tried to warn me. I humiliated you. You weren't my enemy. You were my conscience. Richard, I hope you use these years to reflect on the kind of person you want to be when you get out. You have children. They deserve a better father. They do, he agreed, his voice breaking. Adam, thank you for giving me the chance to be that man. 2 years later, Pinnacle Industries was named Company of the Year by Business Ethics magazine. During the ceremony in Chicago, I spoke to 500 corporate executives. 4 years ago, I was an invisible man. I wore a blue uniform and was treated like a piece of furniture. That invisibility taught me that the true character of an organization is revealed in how it treats the people who have no power to defend themselves. When I blew the whistle on massive corporate fraud, it wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. In a just society, no one is above accountability, no matter how expensive his suit or how high his position. Hundreds of people rose to their feet in ovation. Dozens of executives approached me afterward to tell their own stories of blowing the whistle. Today, 5 years after Richard's arrest, my company, Torres Integrity Solutions, works with 43 organizations in 12 states. Sophia is in high school, excelling in math. Maria has finished her MBA. As for Richard, he was released on parole after 4 years. I hear he's working as an accountant in Oregon, earning 1/10 of what he used to steal every month. If this story of transformation and proof that even the most underestimated man can bring down empires built on lies has touched you, subscribe to the channel. We have dozens of stories showing that there is always a smart way to ensure that your oppressors face the consequences. Last week, a young janitorial worker in San Francisco asked me for advice about irregularities he had discovered at his company. I responded immediately, offering free guidance. Because I've learned that true power isn't in getting revenge on those who underestimated you. It's in using your experience to ensure that others never have to go through what you did. Richard believed that his position made him untouchable. He discovered that he had completely underestimated the power of a man with nothing to lose and everything to gain by fighting for the truth. The last I heard, Richard was riding to work on a used bicycle in Portland. Me? I was opening my 4th regional office. Sometimes the best revenge isn't taking down your enemy. It's rising so high that he becomes irrelevant.